Well, we spent 2025 moving fast and breaking things. And apparently, a new report by the Future of Life Institute says that what we broke in the process was the brakes. So, this is the last episode of 2025 for me, but we're going to talk about how, despite this year, everybody's been talking about how AI has been getting smarter and more capable and all of this. It does raise the question, are the companies behind it all, the ones building it, are they actually in control and paying attention to where things are going? Now, if you've followed me for long, you probably know this, but if you're new here, the goal of this is not to bring up science fiction or to freak people out, to talk about Skynet. It's to objectively examine this and discuss the real business and human risk behind these things. Because at the end of the day, if the foundation we're building on is cracked, then the entire business is unsafe. So that's the goal. Now, I'm Christopher Lind, and this is Future Focus. So today we're going to talk about Future of Life Institute's Safety Index. If you would, before we get into it, I would greatly appreciate if you value this work to like and subscribe to it. If you know somebody after you listen to this that would benefit from hearing it, that might, is making a decision or just would be curious, please share it with them. And if this content in particular saves you from having to read the 101-page PDF, if I did that work for you, you can say thanks, Christopher, by taking me out to lunch or buying me a coffee at buymeacoffee.com/Christopher Lind. It'd be greatly appreciated. But that's totally up to you if you so feel inclined. Okay, now before we get into it, let me run down the agenda because there's 3 parts to this final podcast of 2025. The first part is the what. I really want to talk about what is this FLI safety index. You're probably going to see this report card all over. I'll pull it up on the screen so you get a chance to see it. Who got an F, who got a C, what does it all mean? Then I want to get into the so what, which is really to help you think critically about it. I don't want you to walk away from this and then just parrot my talking points. I hope my talking points encourage you to think about it, and I hope to help you understand where to look and how to wrestle through these things, because there's some factors with the safety report that if you just don't know, it's really hard to actually understand what do all these categories mean. And then finally, I've really made a commitment as I've transitioned the podcast to put a really intentional focus on the end so what do I do? As a leader, as an individual, what practically can I do in response to this? Or what action should I be taking? So you don't walk away from this and just go, great podcast, Christopher, but you actually can do something with it. So to be clear, I'm not here to bash the different AI companies that are in the safety report card. I'm sure at some point I'll have a little bit of color commentary on it, but that's not my goal. I want to help you be an informed consumer, because just like hopefully you wouldn't go out and buy a car without at least pulling the Carfax and seeing, hey, what is this actually went on here? Because even though it looks nice on the surface, maybe there's something I don't see. This is designed to be a crash test. So let's start with the what. Okay, here's a basic executive summary of what we're talking about here. The document is from an institute called the Future of Life Institute. I think that FLI. Yes, Future of Life Institute. And basically, they're safety inspectors when it comes to AI companies. They are independent auditors that come in and they're actually taking a look at, what actually is behind this and to go beyond just the claims. Oh, they said they're safe. No, they want to actually come in and dig around and all this other stuff. And they specifically are really focused on the existential risks of AI. And you'll see that reflected in the report card. They are very concerned knowing that all these big AI companies are charging for artificial superintelligence. They understand the existential risks of that. And they're trying to say, hey, if we're actually marching towards that, are we taking into account the risks that come along with that? And so you will see that reflected in the report. But you got to remember that also comes with it a way that outcome, that report card is going to be weighted, if you will. I don't want to say it's bias. I mean, it would be a form of bias, but it's the way they weight things, and you see what their goal is reflected in that. And so that's a really important thing to say. And this time this isn't the first time. Okay. So I'm actually going to talk about 2 where we sit compared to 2024, but this time there's 8 companies. that they took a look at. And it's graded on a traditional academic scale, so it'll be very familiar to you. But I think one thing to note on this is that, it's not designed to, the way the grading scale is, you're not going to see like straight A's. I'll just warn you about that right now. But that's not inherently bad. It is, but it isn't. So you'll see more when we get into it. Okay. Now, as a preview coming into it, you're going to see in here, and now let me pull it up. So this is the latest one. Okay. So this is the 2025. And you can see they looked at Anthropic, OpenAI, DeepMind, XAI, Meta, Zipoo, and DeepSeek. So some of these are new players. One in particular is a new player from 2024. And you can see the leaders right now are Anthropic, OpenAI, and Google DeepMind. And what that means is the FLI has established that they have plans and frameworks, but you can see, as based on the grades, that it's still messy in execution. Like, there may be some things they've stated that they're doing. Maybe they're playing whack-a-mole. Okay, they're sharing information and they're maybe running to fix the temporary harm. But when it comes to this longer term thinking and the broader, what happens if things go sideways, we're not doing real hot there. Now, one thing that I do really want to talk about, and we'll get into a little more detail, is there are some inherent biases in this, or biases. It's just the weightings of it. And one of those is the whole open source versus closed source. And I'll talk about the implications of those risks. But just as a heads up, if you are a open source AI model, you're automatically getting a lower grade, especially in existential safety, simply because the perspective is, well, it can't be controlled and who knows what people will do with it. And so again, if you're somebody who's a big believer in open source versus somebody who says, no, it should be closed and protected, they would come from the platform of it should be closed and protected where it can be controlled and all this other stuff. They do not like the whole uncontrollable distribution that comes with open source weighting. And again, that's reflected. That's why you see OpenAI and Meta get an automatic F. Same with like DeepSeek. You can literally install DeepSeek and do with it what you want, type of a thing. So that does influence it in some ways. Now, Anthropic is top of the class, but you'll see that even with that, there's still only a C+. So when it comes to overall safety, it's still not great. I mean, C's get degrees, but I don't know that you're going to be, boasting, or you're not going to end up on the valedictorian list for this. Now, to be fair, the way they do their grading, if you look into the actual report, I honestly don't know that we'll ever get to like anybody with straight A's. I don't think anybody's ever going to get a 4.0. So if that's your expectation, I'll just tell you that that's probably not a realistic expectation. But do I think we're where we should be? I would say no. And I think what we're seeing is safety practices in general, even if when I pull up the 2024, which I will here in a minute, the safety practices, the gap is growing between where the tech is and how serious we're taking safety. And while you may look at 2024, which I'll pull this up here, if you look at 2024, let me do a side by side. You might look at this and go, well, Christopher, this is great compared to 2024, December of 2024. There was only a C, one C. Now there's three C-ishes and two D's and an F. And at least, XAI is not a D- anymore, right? Isn't that improvement? I think you have to be careful with interpreting it that way, in the sense that if you look at how much these models have advanced in 2025 and then compare, have the safety ratings moved so significantly, have they kept pace? And I would actually say no. I would say that gap is growing wider. The gap between where safety is in terms of a priority and an emphasis and really working on that versus how fast the models are advancing. No, and I would say one of the concerns I have about this report in particular is the fact that there is a ton of pressure right now to do even more to reduce the demand for safety in these models. There's a huge push to eliminate any possibility of governance or restriction or any sort of guidelines around how these companies need to operate. The push is let them do whatever they want. And that doesn't matter where you sit on the political spectrum. That's just kind of the tone right now, with very few exceptions. So I think the fact we're seeing this gap widen, and the pressure is don't you dare try and even touch or slow that down or do anything that might even be perceived as that. I firmly believe as we go into 2026, my prediction, it's the end of the year, so why not do predictions for 2026? My prediction is we're going to continue to see that gap widen, and I don't think that that is a good thing. So the document, just so you know, if somebody asks in the comments, I'll make sure I link it. You can look it up. It's just look up FLI Safety Index. You can find it. But it is 101 pages, just so you know. And of that, though, only 21 are what I would say kind of the executive summary. The executive summary technically is only the very beginning, then 21 pages of more detail. But the rest is the appendix of all the notes. Like I said, FLI is notorious, and they do a really good job of actually digging beneath the hood. And so they're actually looking at this stuff and seeing what's in there. And so if you actually want to see the details of what did they look at, how did they evaluate, if you want to go further and look into, where might there be bias or where might they not be digging hard enough, you absolutely can. And I'm not going to go into the level of detail that I did when I went through the report, because otherwise this podcast would be 16 hours long. But you can, and I'm sure throughout the rest of the year, you're going to see some of what I saw in here come out in other podcasts. Okay, so that's really an overview of what this is. It's, a safety card, but remember, keep in mind, there's some things to consider. So let's talk about the critical considerations that I think is really important for anybody, because get ready. This thing is going to hit the news feeds. It's going to be all over everywhere. Everybody's going to be talking about how the existential threat of AI and, Terminator's almost here, right? This is the kind of stuff that's coming. The first one is the whole transparency trap. And I really want to shine a light on this because it does open up room for discussion. And we need to have more of these discussions. We live in a world that's just completely polarized. And we need to stop that, because we need to discuss this, which is the whole idea that a low grade, what it means is we can't see inside, or we don't have enough information many times. It's not necessarily always the case, which you'll find when you dig into the details. In some cases, they got a low grade because they did look inside and went, this is bad. In other cases, they just tried to look and it's like, we can't see anything. Whether if it's there, we just don't know. Now, that does open the question, okay, well, how do I feel about that? Because just because you can't see inside of something doesn't inherently mean it's toxic. We can't automatically assume that because we can't see what's behind the veil must necessarily be terrible. So you have to ask yourself, when you're thinking about these models, when you're thinking about who you're working with, and look at other factors so that you can ask yourself, well, do I want for myself or for my organization to build things on a black box? Am I comfortable the way we're using it, the way it's integrated, the way it's involved with things? Am I comfortable with not really knowing what they're doing or how it's working or what their commitment is to safety? And if the answer to that is, I don't really care, or I trust them based on other things I see because they are a company that demonstrates integrity or a commitment to the well-being of people, or they don't put profits above everything. Like if you're seeing those other factors and you go, I firmly believe that they're a safe company to stand behind, well, then it may not be that big of a deal if they go, listen, we just don't share all these details with you because we don't, for whatever reasons they have. If you're comfortable with that, then maybe you see a low score and you go, I don't really care about that. If you're not comfortable with that, then you should take it very seriously. I guess one question I would ask is, would you go to a restaurant that refused a health inspection? Maybe the kitchen's clean, maybe it's not, but you would have to ask yourself, am I comfortable eating there if they're refusing a health inspection, or they don't even know how the kitchen runs? The food just comes out and they're like, we're not really sure what goes on back there. we're sure it's fine though. Go ahead and eat it. If you're somebody who goes, food tastes good, looks good enough to me, I don't care. Well, then maybe the scorecard won't matter much to you. If you're somebody who goes, like, no way am I doing this. Now, I would encourage people that, especially with how AI is being used and the way it's getting embedded into everything, you should at least have a healthy risk appetite. This isn't something you want to go YOLO on. So if you're seeing all Fs, you might want to go, is that the best choice to be making? But that's a choice you have to make. And that's what the scorecard can help you do. Now, the second one I hinted at in kind of the overview, there's the whole ideological war going on right now between open source and closed source models. Meta isn't failing by accident. They have made an intentional stance on the fact they want to optimize for access. They believe everyone should have access to the open weights and be able to do whatever they want with their model. That's the whole point of open source. And there's a ideological perspective that comes along with that. And so the people who are very pro open source believe there shouldn't be anything that's restricted. You should be allowed to do with whatever you want, and the accountability should fall 100% on the people doing it. And I understand where that perspective comes from. And so Meta has very much said, that's what we're doing. We don't care. Llama is open source, and FLI doesn't like that. They are not in that ideological camp. They do not stand by that. To them, this is too big of a risk to just hand off to anyone to do with whatever they want, type of a thing is how they would look at it. So in some cases, this scorecard does reflect this ideological war that's going on. And so you do have to also ask yourself then, well, what model am I more comfortable with? Now, the report card you'll see if you go into the details, you can see where, well, okay, so I didn't see, Christopher, I'm looking at this report card. It doesn't necessarily inherently say, are they open source or closed source? If you don't know that, you can see it in the report, or you can just do a quick Google search. You'll learn which ones are open source and which ones aren't. But this ideological bait is coloring the scorecard, and it's important for you to know that when you're analyzing and making decisions about it. Because if you're very much in the camp of open source and you say, we want to be able to do whatever we want, and we firmly believe that is the best path, then you're going to think about the scorecard differently than if you go, we don't really know what we're doing, and we think it's too dangerous, and we think the experts should be responsible for that. And so that's part of the decision-making process. Anthropic, part of the reason they're getting the best scores is they're very closed. They're closed in what they do. And then you can say, well, we want to host it ourselves and be responsible for everything that happens. And, that's all on us. Well, then you might say Meta's fine. We're good with Llama. So I think my point there is, I don't want the F to scare you. Okay. If your goal is on-prem hosting and taking 100% responsibility for what you're doing with it, okay, then this scorecard may mean something very different to you than somebody who's not doing that. But it's important that you know the risks and you take those into account as you're making decisions around it. Now, the last one is the whole difference between the risk horizon and what kind of risk you're considering. Because the report throughout the whole thing is screaming loss of control. Okay. And that is largely what you're going to see in a lot of the articles, the headlines, the media associated with it, is this report card is proving Skynet is an inevitability and we're doomed, and if we don't do something now, we got to change from it. And if it sounds like, well, Christopher, where do you stand on all these? I have very complicated feelings. So I'm not going to necessarily lay out every single thing. I think there's actually value in multiple perspectives. Even going back to the open source versus closed source, people ask me, which one do you think is right, Christopher? And I'm like, I would have to understand your circumstances, the team you have involved, like how prepared are you to take on what you're doing? If you're in a certain position, I may say open source is a great path to take. If you're not, I would go, no way should you be touching this kind of a thing. And so I think the same thing is true on the risk horizon. Well, should we be worried about existential risks, which I highlighted as kind of what this report screams about? But what it doesn't scream about so much is, well, okay, yeah, but what does this mean on an operational level? Like, it's very concerned about what happens if we get to AGI. Are we prepared for that? But maybe you read this report and you're going, we just launched Copilot or Gemini, or we just signed up with Anthropic. Like, I'm just trying to know, like, how likely is this thing to mess up the day-to-day stuff we, bought it to do, type of a thing. I'm not thinking about the possibility of sky loss. I'm worried about the loss of data in my company versus a loss of trust, type of a thing. And so it's really important to understand that this report has a bend towards that big strategic kind of far-reaching thinking about where this could go based on what the companies are proclaiming they're striving towards, not let's look at what people are practically doing today with the tech and how risky, how safe is it for them to, put their information in. And really, if you look at it, when it comes to current harms, Anthropic, OpenAI, Google, like, they're not doing bad when you really think about it, in the sense that, B's and high C's, it's not great. But I told you the scoring matrix before is not necessarily, going to be based on, everybody gets a straight A type of a thing. So on current harms, if you look at it, well, that's a very different risk appetite and the information sharing. Honestly, Anthropic, OpenAI, and Google, they're doing an okay job of at least sharing the information so you can make informed decisions. And I think that's just a really important thing to take into consideration as you're filtering through this. Are you looking at this report to determine whether the Terminator movie is going to happen in real life? Or are you looking at this report to say, hey, I'm trying to make decisions about how I use AI in my own life, or to help me run my business right now? And so my encouragement to you on this third point is to just not let the headlines about the end of the world become a distraction from the end of the quarter. If these models were to leak your data, you're going to have a really big problem today. You're not going to need to wait till 2030 to see if hive mind, AI robots are taking over. You're going to be out of a job and your company is going to go under, type of a thing. And so it's just important to take that into consideration when you're looking at these reports and thinking through what you're seeing in these different categories. Okay, so let's transition to kind of this final stretch, which is what do I do with this, Christopher? I've now understood these kind of 3 points, these considerations I need to take into account as I'm looking at these report cards. I'm seeing these different grades. I'm seeing these different categories. What do I do with it? And I think the first one is you really need to do an audit of your AI supply chain. If you're a leader right now and if you're not aware of what AI tools you have in your organization, you should be doing that in 2026. And to be clear, this is what I really want to emphasize. Not just do we have Copilot or Gemini or Anthropic, or OpenAI. Like, there's shadow AI everywhere. There are SaaS tools in your ecosystem, in your digital ecosystem, that they're hooked up to these things, and they're wrapped in these models, and they're wrappers for these models. You may not see it, but the tools you're using may be, pinging back on some of these things. And so it's really important that you're not just auditing, did we sign up for Copilot or do we have Google Gemini, but you're also looking at what other tools do we have that have AI capability that we're actively using. And that might mean actually asking the AI companies or the companies that you're buying these products from, which foundation model is this built on? Because you might not know that inherently by looking at, I don't know, Workday or, some tool that you have in your system, your payroll platform. You may not know unless you ask, what foundational model are you running on? And maybe if you already have it in your system, it might be too late. But it might be something as part of your RFP process, or as you're evaluating new vendors, you might want to be asking that, finding out from them, what model do they actually build this on top of, so that you understand the risk and what additional follow-up questions to ask. Because if, say, they're built on a foundational model that is open source, you need to understand that the vendor then has greater responsibility and accountability for how that what the model does and how it handles things and what it may or may not be able to do. And so you can't just say, well, here's what Meta says, because, well, that won't matter because the vendors are probably in more control of it. If if they're built on Anthropic or OpenAI, those vendors might not really have any freedom to tweak or adjust, and so it limits what you can even ask their AI to do. It limits what kind of capability it has. It limits the risks associated with it. Like, the vendor may not be able to control that. And understanding that, you won't be able to understand that if you don't actually audit and explore, hey, like, what tools are in our system? What AIs are we actually using? What AIs are the tools that have AI? Are they getting their AI from? Type of a thing. And that's something that I think is going to become a major pain point for organizations that they are not doing today. And so you have a chance to get ahead of that. The second action that I think would be really valuable for people to do, and this ties to last week's podcast as well, which is grounding truth conversations, having more of these truth conversations, because the reality is, a lab report is good. And honestly, Future of Life Institute's lab, they do a really good job. And you can see that in the many pages of appendix to show how they're doing it. And yet, they don't understand the implications for your business or the way you use AI in your life. They're not looking at it through a you lens. And so you still need to do that. Just because a report card says, hey, we're a B plus, or whatever, doesn't mean, okay, well, then everything's fine. Something that might be safe, that gets a really high grade, you may talk to your teams and find out, yeah, it's safe. It's so safe, it's useless because we're restricted from doing what we actually need it to do. You may be needing an AI use case. And that's why when people ask me, is open source or closed source better? I'm like, well, what are you trying to do? Because there might be an environment that you're working in where the security and restrictions of a closed source model make it as such you can't actually use the AI to the best of its ability for the use cases you're trying to do. And you actually need that flexibility. But you won't know until you're talking to people. And I do run into this in some of my consulting work where people go, yeah, for our teams and what we're doing, AI is useless because it kicks it back and it says, sorry, I can't do that, type of a thing. It closes it up and there's no way for us to unrestrict it. We spend all our time trying to jailbreak it to get our work done, type of a thing. And it's legitimate, like, good work to do. We're not trying to, commit crimes or anything like that. And so in that case, safe might not be great for your teams. They may be really frustrated by that. On the other hand, maybe you go, it's really fast. It works, great. That unrestrictedness is wonderful. But the hallucination rate or the quality around it is absolutely terrible. And then it turns out, oh, well, that's because it's open source and we don't actually have the team available internally to actually manage the model. Their backlog is so long, they can't even update or tweak things to actually work for us. So maybe we actually do need a closed source model that they do a lot of that work for us. I don't know your situation, but that's something you need to do as you go into 2026, is actually have conversations with the employees, with the people who are actually using these models, and find out from them, how is it actually performing? Is it working to your liking? Are you constantly running into walls? Is it blocking you from doing what you need to do? If so, then you might want to use this information from reports like this to decide, well, maybe we need to up our risk appetite because open source is the right path for us. But again, you won't know that until you talk to people and have conversations about how is this working in real life, because your employees, they actually are the safety layer. I mean, these kinds of things are really good, watchdogging these big tech companies. We need more of this. And even if they got it right, that doesn't necessarily mean it's safe for you and your company or your use cases. And I think that is a really important distinguishment in this. Okay, the third and final action that I would say with this is really kind of almost strategic decoupling. What's clear from this report card is that the AI companies are prioritizing speed and progress above all else. Okay, they're saying we're We're going to run as hard and fast as we can. And as it stands today, governing authorities and things are kind of saying, "Yep, we're just going to let them do it." We could have this argument all day long, whether we like that or don't like that, but that's where we are. And so they are charging forward, full steam ahead with a report card filled with Fs around existential safety. Okay, that's where we are. You don't have to participate in that. And I think that's a really important distinguishment, that as you come into 2026, you're critically examining, where are we on this? Is the way we're using AI or where we're experimenting with it or where we're playing around with it, is it extremely low risk? Do we have the right expertise in the room? Do we have enough people to oversee and monitor this kind of stuff? If not, maybe we need to be more cautious. Maybe we're in the kind of environment or the kind of industry where speed at any cost, while maybe big tech can just apologize and pay a fine and move on with their life if they do something catastrophic, maybe you can't. And I'm not advocating that if you can, that's the right path to take, believe me. But what I'm saying is, you have to take, you're going to hear me in 2026 talk a lot more about personal responsibility and the importance of personal responsibility. And that's not me saying it's no longer anybody else's responsibility, but the deck keeps coming back in that governing authorities and the big tech companies are not incentivized nor seeming to be interested in taking responsibility. And so you need to do that. And so you're going to need to decide in 2026, where are we going to strategically discouple ourselves from the madness that is? And, we'll let the market beta test some of these messy updates. We don't necessarily need to jump on the bandwagon of having the latest and greatest of everything. And that's an intentional choice. That's not us just being resistant to change. That's us weighing and wrestling through the risks and going, no, we're choosing to. And if somebody were to ask you, why are you not doing that? You have an answer to give that you've thought through and you've been really clear about that. And that is work that everyone needs to do, which isn't necessarily just looking at this scorecard. It's actually looking in the mirror and looking in your organization and going, where are we? What are the risks? What are we trying to accomplish? What is the technical acumen? What is our headcount, right? There's a lot of other factors. And this is the perfect time of year to do it, because we're all coming into the end of the year and beginning of 2026, where this is where our head should be. Okay. So that's a quick rundown on this safety index. I hope you found it helpful. I would, again, highly encourage you to check out the report itself, and I will have additional content. I'll be writing a Substack, going even deeper on this week and some other things. But what is clear is the gap between capability and safety is widening. Don't believe that just because you see the grades slightly improving between 2024 and 2025, that we're somehow, closing the gap, because progress in these models is happening much faster than safety has kept up. And that means the responsibility, like it or not, is shifting from the vendor to the user, which is you. That means you are responsible for things. Now, that's a lot. I recognize that is a lot to handle. That's a lot to consider. So if you need help mapping this supply chain and your whole ecosystem of tools and weighing in on, do we need open source or closed source or all these other things, please don't hesitate to reach out. This is the work that I do, and I love doing it. And I love helping people make wise decisions they can stand behind and mitigate risks while still pushing themselves as far forward as they can safely. Would be the way I would say that. So keep an eye out for the article. Thanks for listening. And I hope you have a wonderful, wonderful holiday season. Enjoy the rest of 2025. Here's to a wonderful 2026, and we will see you on the other side.